Welcome to a video from digitalize.com. In this video I want to look at the motion sequencer on the multi-poly. I've done a similar video for the mob wave. They're very similar, but I wanted to focus on the multi-poly on this. It looks quite complex and it can seem a bit intimidating to get started with, but it's actually quite simple at its basic level. So what you heard there was a more advanced one using 4 layers, but I'm going to start right at the beginning and do a nice simple one. So I'm going to switch to init performance on 1 layer. So I've just got one synth on there. So the motion sequencer is not like a traditional sequencer, so it's not where you're recording what you're playing. It's a series of events that you can have. It can change the pitch of a sound, it can change the filter cutoff, the resonance, the wavetable, anything really, anything that's on the mob wave, or anything really that's on the multi-poly, you can change through the motion sequencer. So that gives you really a lot of power to it. We've got 4 lanes or 4 sequences to choose from, as well as pitch, shape, which I'll show you shortly, and timing. So each step can have its own timing. So it's not like a traditional sync. So each step can have its own timing. And then we've got loads of other controls. So I'm going to break it down. So the simplest level, we can just record some motion in there and it will play it back. So let's have a look. So I can go to the sequencer, go to record. I can choose whether I want to record pitch or whether I want to record to one of the sequence lanes. So if I wanted to record some motion, maybe tweaking the filter or something like that, I could record that. So in fact, let's have a look at that first. So I go to sequence lane A, it's ready to start. So I hold down a key and twiddle the knob and it'll record it. So there you can hear what I've just recorded, and then you can see those steps. So it's not like a sequencer playing a melody, it's just playing those steps, and you hear nice continuing variable on there. So that's one way. The other way is the pitch. So I could record some pitch. I can choose what key. I'm going to do it in G minor for a change. So enter now, press the first note. Right. So there you can hear, so that pitch is going through there, and you can hear that the effect of that sequence level on there. Now if we for a moment go to the cutoff, you can see it's mapped sequence A as the cutoff, but I'm going to just quiet that down now. I'll look at the pitch. So that's playing that. Now if I play a second note, notice it's changing the, notice while it's following the key that I'm pressing. If I play 2 notes, it's affecting every note on there. So there's options around keys and things like that, which you can see I've got down here, but I'll have a look at those later. Let's have a look at the timings now. You hear it all going through in the same timing. Before I go to timing, I'm just going to look at timing next, but before I go to that, I want to show you the start and end points on the sequence. So to simplify things down, I'm going to go with a 4-note sequence. Now you can see I've just dragged that across to give us those 4 notes. And I'm also going to have a 4-step on my filter. So there you can hear those 4 notes over again, but you can actually choose. I could start from step 2 and go to step 3 like that, and you can hear that repeat time. And then here you can see I've actually got the start point, the end point, and the number of times it repeats. So I could only repeat it twice, say. And the same goes, that option is also available on these other sequences as well. So we stopped using the filter cuff, didn't we? So I'm just going to apply that back again. Let's get back to 4 as well. So you heard that pitch runs twice, You notice the filter control is carrying on because all these are independent, so you don't have to sync them up. So I could have a 3-note pitch sequence and say 5 notes on the filter, or all of them, 64 steps on the filter. So they can get out of sync, which is an interesting effect sometimes. If I change that to repeat infinite, so now that filter cut is not always on the same note because they're not tied together. You can use a master and sync it. It ties it all together. We'll have a look at that again later. So, but that's a really interesting thing you can do. You can have these different lengths, different repeat points, and not sync together. Right, so I've got my sequence there. Let's put it back to that. Now let's have a look at the timing now. So the timing, we've got the same options as before. We have got some other extras like the speed. You can control the overall speed and the swing on it as well. But you can also change these lengths. So you could have this first one to be an 8, and then we could have 2 32s, and then 16. So you've really got flexibility over each of the steps, and also whether the actual notes play. So if I go back to, and I found this quite a useful technique, let's go back to 16s. You can say have 2 and then a rest, and then I could have another rest further on. So I've got 2 rests there, and you hear it doesn't do anything. Those 2. You can still hear the notes because I'm pressing that and the filter is open. But it can be a good technique. I'll show you something I did with that later. Now, the other thing we've got is this shape lane. So for now, I'm going to just reset a couple of things. So while we're on the sequence, let's have a look at this transition. You can hear a nice smooth transition between that filter. You can see it there. But we can change that and have off. See, now it's that digital steps now. So that could be the desired effect you want. So that's one option. You can use linear, which is what we have originally, exponential or logarithmic. Or you can even set the levels individually, the transition in between. So you can set it to be that one to be linear, that one to be off, that one to be linear, and so on. So we'll change that to. So you've really got that flexibility to set those levels individually like that, which is really good. The other thing you've got is the shape lanes as well. So at the moment we're not using this shape. If we switch the shape on, you won't be able to see any difference because all the shape lanes are high. But if you look, there's loads of shapes you can use. You can use a triangle, or you can saw down, which is useful. But then you've also got these double ones like that, or even triple and quadruple. Now you might think they're not that useful, but actually they can have some interesting effects on, and I've used them for doing ratchet sequencing, which I'll perhaps show you an example of in a bit. So these shapes can have some very interesting effects. So let's just show you an example. Let's make the pitch use the shape. Well, that first one is a bit complex, so let's. So you can see it, it's going there. So that initially is going, the pitch is going up, down. It's going from high, down, up, down, straight up, down, and then straight high again. So we could actually do it like this way. So you can see it's quite again a useful effect. If I put let's just focus on the filter. Set these high as well. So if I set it like that now, that filter is going to go from high to low to high to low like that. So that's always a really, really interesting effect, but you can use that in a lot of different ways. You could actually use them as envelopes. So you could have multi-triggered envelopes. So you could trigger a different envelope style as your sequence is playing as well. So a lot of interesting things you can do with that as well. And of course, I'm using A there, but we've got all these other ones that we could combine to. I'm going to make something a little bit more musical in a sec. So let's say I change that saw to be a detuned saw. We'll set no detuning. And let's say I want to detune it later in the sequence. So I can just say, I can record it like I showed before, or I can go to generators, sequence B, might be controlled by, I've done all of it, but you can make it subtle if you want. And later I want to put a detuning in there like that. So straight away you can hear that, and then I could have the other ones control a bit of resonance and other things. So that's one way of using the sequencer like that. There's some other interesting tricks with the motion sequence, as well as just these controllers. You can do things like trigger envelopes. So let's take my amp envelope and make a little short attack sound. So there, I've got a short attack sound. And you see, kind of, we turn the sustain down, it's disappearing. But we like that effect, and so if I set a short envelope on it, it disappears. You can't hear it again. But if you go to envelopes, you can see you can actually trigger the envelopes by anything. You could have a foot pedal or chaos pad or another LFO or something else. But in our case, I'm going to use the step pulse. So the step pulse is this timing it's using. And I pretty often combine that with the filter as well. So we're not using the filter at the moment, but let's just the filter envelope. So there we go, we're triggering those envelopes on there now. So let's, in fact, I'm going to even set this, turn that off now. Right, set the decay really short now. Let's make it interesting by saying let's make the decay affected by sequence A. So now those levels, which you see there, are affecting the decay of the envelope. And then the detune is being affected by those there. Now if I turn the shape off, so the shape now, so we're just getting a, turn that off. So we've not got linear anymore, and it's not using the shape. So if we see the envelope, you can see it's just pushing it straight out to those values. So I put a nice linear transition on. And actually it sounded quite good with the shape on there. Because it's probably because it's like it's triggering it later. So it's making the first note seem a bit longer because the envelope is being triggered there, and halfway through that sequence, so it's kind of dividing that bar in half. Maybe we could so I say triggered, the envelope's not being triggered by this, the envelope length is being increased. But that's an interesting point about we could trigger the envelope. So I'll show you another technique. So let's put this on. I'm going to put this all the way across on all of them for now, because the envelope I'm going to not trigger from the step pulse, which is continually, I'm going to do it from that sequence. I'll do it on both, I think. Now, so now the threshold's 50. So when that value is above 50, so that one, and that one, that's when you can hear the envelope be generated. If I do those 2, 3, you get 3, and so on. Then I put them all on, and I'll leave a gap there like that. So there you can see that's being triggered. Now, if we turn the shape off, I think we'll hear something different. And that's because the values are staying at 100, and then they drop, and then they go back to 100. So that envelope will only be triggered when it by the value hitting 100. So while it's there, it's staying at 100, so it doesn't re-trigger it, but then it drops down, goes to 100, triggers it, drops down, goes to 100, triggers it. That's why we're using the shape, and I've done that triangle wave to do that, so that it triggers it. But this is where you can do some interesting effects. I can do a double one, and so we get a double trigger on there, kind of that ratchet effect. I've got a full video on how to do that actually, so check that out. So you can hear that ratchet. Now, the other thing there, it kind of delays it a bit, and I think I could do like so up, so the envelope kicks in a bit later. Of course, the other thing I could do is I could set that one to be 32, that one to be 32, which is kind of like the ratchet, but they're playing different notes. If I change it the same, you can do it that way. But if you want the same note to be triggered, then I find that, and there's even a 4 one, I think. I'll put them back to 16s. So that's the basic of that. So that's a basic example of it. But we could do some other things as well. We could have an oscillator 2 in sync mode, and if we could change that tuning and control by step C. So as we set that value up now, it'll change the tuning of, I'm just going to put a few random ones in, of oscillator 2, but because it's synced to oscillator 1, we'll get that sort of sync effect. Now we can make it more subtle just by reducing that down. So that's another way of doing it as well. Now, I mentioned early on the pitch about this key thing, so you can actually fix it to a key. So that's fixing it to C major, but I could change it to D minor, the saddest key of them all, which is what I was playing anyway. So that's a nice way of keeping it intact. Now the other ones you'll see here, you've got this random order, note and advance. So for that, I'll go to lane C, lane D. We're not using that one at the moment. So I'm going to set 4 values on here, 0, say 20, 70 and 100, and I'm just going to restrict it to these four. I'm going to switch to a digital wave, and I'm going to use the AE vocal one because it's quite a distinctive one. Right, so we're not using these for at the moment, but this, if you morph this wave, but this one, if you change its position, you hear different, you get sort of different vowel sounds, especially if I elongate that envelope a little bit. Don't forget, it's still being modified by the motion sequencer, but I'm just going to extend it. There we go. So go back to the motion sequencer. So you can see that's ticking through. I'm going to set the position to be modified by layer D, sequence D. So you can hear it picking those values, but let's, instead of doing that, let's do note and advance. And what note and advance does is you'll see it change. Each time it starts from the next note onwards, so that gives you some really interesting effects. And especially, I kind of find it handy if you maybe set that to a rest or gate, sorry, so gate won't move on. So you can see it's using different. So there you can see now it's stepping through and choosing that value. Another good example, maybe the DD8000 waveforms, and I turn off the crossfading so it sounds, so you can hear the different steps. You can see it moving there, and that's because it's gone linear. If I turn it off, so it's doing a clean transition each time. So that's another way of using it, and I use that to recreate the monopoly on the multipoly, and I'll show you that in a second. The other I've got is random as well. So it just chooses a random value. So you could do that for pitch as well. So if we put our sequence back on. Do them all random. One I did on the other video with the bit of the Berlin style. And here you can hear that was trigger. Another example is the one I used at the beginning. So here you can hear example of using different sequencing. So there's the slow sequence because I've set it to use just the whole note, and you notice it's not going around because I'm just using that same whole note each time. So that's why that sequence runs at one speed, whereas the other sequence and you can hear those levels are kicking in somewhere, and that's because that oscillator 3's level is actually being controlled by step B, so you can only hear oscillator 3 on those kicks there. Now, I mentioned the other, you could use this as a giant envelope as well. That's the other option you've got, is to have it as at one time, and you can set a 16-step envelope. So you can set it as the volume of an oscillator, and you can set all these levels yourself and have that, just have it to run once, so not to repeat, and that's making you a 16 or a 64 step envelope if you want as well. The other thing I mentioned is a mono poly, the original Korg Mono poly. So the original Korg Mono poly had 4 oscillators and 1 filter, and as you played each note, it would use the next oscillator. I've used something similar to rotate around, so here you can hear I'm using 4 oscillators and using that note on advance. Each time I play a note, it's picking up the next level. So the first time you press it, A's at 100 and the others are at 0. So when you press your first note, you get this one, and then when you press the second note, the next time, it's displaying that one, and then that one, and then that one, and then that one as well. So that's a way of using the motion sequencer in that mode as well. So there's another example of a sequence. So there you can see a sequence. And say sequence B there is controlling oscillator 3. And I think sequence C is controlling oscillator 4. So that's how you can get that effect. But basically you can use the sequencer to control anything, the pitch, the detune, the oscillator type. Basically you can use the sequencer to control any of these parameters you see on here. It's a really powerful feature, and you can make some interesting effects with it. You can get to crossfade string sounds, to fade in, fade out, however you want. You can control it. So there's 1 motion sequencer per layer, so that's 4 sequences per layer, and I've even managed to create sort of drum type sounds on there. So there you can hear there's that bass sound. There's my bass sequence, and hear the gaps every now and again. We've got some rest in there. Doing the kick snare, there you can see it. I'm using the sequence to control the filter and the noise levels. So it's that kind of flexibility you've got with that. So it opens a whole range of programming capabilities, the motion sequencer, and it's often the answer to anything that you want to kind of do on sound design. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you found that useful. You can find out more on digitallifestyle.com. Check out my other video on the whole ratcheting thing as well if you're interested in that. If you've got any suggestions for other videos you'd like me to cover on the multi-poly, please let me know. I'll see you on the next one.